Hello and good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Around the World with Envoy, Trends and Policies in APAC. Thank you for all of our attendees for joining us this afternoon. Before we dive into the main presentation, just want to take care of a few housekeeping items. As a reminder, today's session will last for about 40 to 45 minutes, and that includes audience question and answers. So if you have a question, please ask it, and you can do that by typing that question into the GoToWebinar control box or control panel that you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded. All attendees will receive a link to download the recording tomorrow afternoon. You will also receive a link to download the slide deck, so you'll be able to view those two materials at a later date. Additionally, you will receive SHRM and HRCI continuing education credits. Again, all three of those items will be emailed tomorrow afternoon, so please keep an eye out on your inboxes. If you don't see it, shoot us a message and we'll make sure you get those materials. Okay, so moving along, for nearly 20 years, Envoy has been on a mission to fix the frustrating, confusing, and inefficient immigration process. Envoy combines expert legal representation with innovative technology to deliver the only platform that makes it seamless for companies to hire, mobilize, and manage a global workforce. Envoy secures work authorization in over 150 countries, has grown 41% year over year, and works with over 1,000 customers. We are particularly proud of our NPS score, which is a testament to the employee experience that we provide. Introducing the main presenter for today, I'm very excited to introduce Patricia Clarino. Patricia is a Senior Global Mobility Specialist, APAC, here at Envoy. She is based in Sydney, Australia, and she is the point of contact for Envoy's clients in the Asia-Pacific region. Patricia is a professional with over 10 years of work experience in global mobility and immigration case management, with a primary focus in the Asia-Pacific region. Prior to joining Envoy, she worked in other multinational companies in the capacity of an in-house advisor and also as a third-party vendor where she provided strategic advice to external and internal clients on Asia-Pacific compliance. Patricia has also lived and worked in Singapore and Philippines prior to moving to Australia. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Eric, for having me today. And thank you to everyone who has attended this webinar.
So before I turn things over to Patricia, two additional slides to cover. The first is really just a brief look at our agenda for this afternoon, starting with really a high-level overview of the Asia-Pacific region. Then we're going to dive, or Patricia is going to dive a little bit deeper into some countries. Those countries are China, Singapore, Thailand, Australia, Japan, and then Hong Kong. And then we're going to end things with closing remarks. And then, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, question and answer session. And as always, the content that you see in this presentation is not intended as legal advice. So for additional information, please consult with a qualified professional. Okay, so let's jump into things here, starting with that overview of Asia. So Patricia, what can you tell our audience, our attendees, really about the Asia-Pacific region and why it's becoming, and why it has been, and why it's becoming even more important and really in global mobility?
Sure, Eric. Let's just go to the next slide, please. Okay, cool. So Asia is a massive area of opportunity for global companies given its economic strength and its pool of skilled talent. There has been a research conducted by Oxford Economics wherein they've mentioned that Asian economies will be the most successful emerging markets by 2030. And 6 out of the 10 emerging countries that will dominate the global economy in the next 10 years would be all from Asia. And those countries are number 1 at the top of the list would be India, followed by the Philippines, Indonesia, China, Malaysia, and Thailand on the 7th place. Let's move on to the next slide, Eric. You could. Thank you for that. And in discussing Asia, it would also be beneficial for us to discuss the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, or also known as APEC. The APEC is a regional economic forum established in 1989 to leverage the growing interdependence of the Asia Pacific countries. The forum currently has 21 members and predominantly focuses on trade and economic issues. Moving on to the next slide. With the APEC membership, the citizens of participating countries are able to apply for the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Business Travel Card, or also known as ABTC. This travel card allows its holders to travel to participating countries without having to apply for a separate visa. It can mostly be utilized for visiting participating countries for business purposes only. And I'd like to highlight to everyone that it shouldn't be utilized for work. Each country has their own eligibility requirements for ABTC application. However, the common criteria would be the following. The applicant should hold the passport from one of the participating countries of the APEC. And the applicant also should be able to show proof that he or she has been traveling regularly within the Asia Pacific region. And lastly, the applicant shouldn't have any criminal convictions at all. The current processing time for the ABTC is about 3 months, given those participating countries will have to vet the application as well before approving the ABTC card. So that's an overview of the ABTC. Do you want to go ahead with the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Eric?
So yeah, no, that was a really great overview. So now we're gonna jump into some of those deeper dives into specific countries, as we mentioned at the top of the agenda. So Patricia, starting with the largest country in the world by population, China, which has approximately 1.38 billion people. What can you tell us about China in terms of global mobility and immigration?
Sure. Just a high-level overview. According to a 2016 report from the Administration for Industry and Commerce in China, there are a total of 77 million companies in the country. So that's massive. And I believe that China is currently attracting talents, and they are currently trying to streamline their processes in the country. At this point, the available visas they have would be the M visa for conducting business meetings in the country. And for those employers who would want to bring in foreign nationals to work in the country will then have to apply for this Z visa, work permit, and residence permit. And those employers must have an established local entity in the country. Moving on to the next slide, there are some key developments in China wherein new visas are introduced to foster a favorable business environment. Those talents who come to China to study or for business or employment can apply for this long-term visa that lasts between 2 to 5 years. And recently, they have introduced new permanent residency rules. Previously, only foreign talents who made major and extraordinary contributions while in China, or those who filled a skills gap, were allowed to apply for permanent residence. Those with in-demand skills and those whose annual income or taxes reach a specified threshold can apply for permanent residence, as can their spouses and underage children. And those who have held a job in China for 4 years in a row and have been resident for at least 6 months each year, whose annual income is higher than 6 times the annual average worker's wage, and who pay at least 20% of their income in taxes, would be eligible for permanent residence under the new rules. So as we can see here, China is really becoming open to foreign talents and to bridge the skills gap in the country.
Awesome. So thanks for that overview on China. So now as we move along, the next country, or sorry, well, not really a country, the next area we're going to, or Patricia, you're going to discuss is Hong Kong. Obviously, Hong Kong has been in the news a lot these last couple months due to ongoing protests. Before we get there, though, what can you tell us about generally immigration and working in Hong Kong?
Sure, thanks for that, Eric. So Hong Kong is China's neighboring country, and all applications in Hong Kong are filed with the Hong Kong Immigration Department. And the typical processing time for these applications take about 4 to 6 weeks from date of submission. And at this point, there really is no short-term work visa option in the country. And those visa options mentioned on this slide are typically issued for at least 1 year. And those employer-sponsored visas are typically the Employment Visa General and the Quality Migrant Visa. So moving on to the next slide, I'd like to discuss more about the recent developments in Hong Kong. This country is a very business-friendly country in Asia, and they've actually recently allowed same-sex partners to obtain dependent visas, which is, I think, is a huge progress in the region, given Asia is known for its conservative policies on matters like this one. However, as you've mentioned earlier, Eric, there have been recent protests in the country, and I understand that is still ongoing. It's mainly because those people are demanding full democracy and police accountability from what happened in the earlier protests. So it is advisable for companies or employers to advise your employees traveling to this country to regularly check travel advisories and plan their trip accordingly. But at the moment, we really haven't seen any effects on the processing time on the visa applications due to the protest.
Interesting. Patricia, quick question that came in from the audience. You mentioned just checking travel alerts. Where's the best resource? Like if our company is based in the U.S., who typically provides those travel alerts? Is it the State Department or another agency?
Sure. The State Department should have some advisories in their website, and also just reading through embassy travel advisories, or even read the news, or even
Mhm.
get in touch with the immigration providers to provide a better insight on what's happening on the ground.
Gotcha. Cool. So moving along, next country is Singapore, which, as I understand, has historically been very pro-business. So, Patricia, what can you tell us about Singapore?
Yeah, that's correct, Eric. So Singapore is a city-state. It's a very small country, but the country is very rich and they have a lot of businesses. It's like Hong Kong. They're very business friendly, and their main focus previously is for a financial institution to establish companies in the country. And I think nowadays they're trying to build up technology companies as well, and they're trying to be the um, Silicon Valley in the Asia, as you say. And so just a brief overview of the immigration system in Singapore. So Singapore has two immigration authorities. It's the ICA, which is um, going the Immigration Checkpoints Authority, and MOM, the Ministry of Manpower. So MOM would typically process applications that are employer sponsored, and the ICA would typically manage the individual applications, such as permanent residency application or citizenship applications. So for all visa applications that are employer sponsored, it's all done online via the ministry's EP online system, and their processes are very streamlined. So moving on to the recent developments in the country. On the 30th of July, the EDB, or Economic Development Board and Enterprise in Singapore, they've announced plans to pilot Tech at SG. It's a program aiming to facilitate the employment pass applications of core team members of technology companies in order to help these companies grow in Singapore and just expand in the region. Although the authorities haven't announced relevant details on this program, they mentioned that there might be more flexibility in the eligibility requirements for these candidates, and potentially allowing these candidates without formal academic qualifications but specialized skills to be granted an employment pass application. So that's quite exciting for Singapore, because they are typically requiring um, someone with a bachelor's degree before you're able to be granted with an employment pass in the country. So that's a good start. And I think that's it for Singapore.
Awesome. Great. So moving along, next up we have Thailand,
Mhm.
with a population of approximately 69 million. So, Patricia, what can you tell us about Thailand?
Sure. Thailand is known for um, its people. They're mostly happy people in Thailand. So the country is have seen some growth in foreign talent recently, and I believe the authorities are offering short-term and long-term work permit options at the moment. So the short-term option would be the urgent work permit, which is initially valid for 15 days, and with an option to renew for another 15 days, provided um, the employer or the candidate would be able to provide a valid and sound justification as to why he's required to apply for another 15 days. But I'd like to highlight that this urgent work permit has a cooling off period wherein the companies wouldn't be able to apply for another urgent work permit for the same applicant within 45 days from the departure date of the applicant. So just be mindful of the cooling off period. And on the other hand, there's this long-term work visa that they also offer, and the authorities would typically issue that for a year, together with a long-term visa and a re-entry permit. And there have been recent changes in the regulations, specifically in the requirements. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So recently, the Thai authorities are now requesting for the police certificate to be provided by those applicants from African countries. And previously, medical examinations are only required for the initial application, but at the moment, the authorities are now requesting for the applicants to also complete this medical checkup at the point of renewing their work and long-term visas. So yeah, those are the relevant changes in the immigration law in Thailand that we've seen recently.
Great. Awesome. So next up on our list, Patricia, is the country you're currently living in, Australia. So what can you yeah, what can you tell our attendees about some trends in Australia?
Sure. I'll just provide them a brief overview first of how the applications are processed in the country. So basically, all visa applications are processed by the Department of Home Affairs. And most applications that are employer sponsored are filed online, and it's done by a registered migration agent. And Australia offers a lot of visa options for business investors. As you can see in the visa options, there's a wide list over there. But in addition to that, there are different subclasses per visa type. So Australia really is offering a lot of visa options for business investors, skilled professionals, and employers just looking at hiring foreign talent in the country. So the climate at the moment in Australia is that the current government is becoming protectionist. There has been a recent election in the country, and the Morrison government has won the seats. So they have introduced significant changes in the country's immigration policy, and these were released in July of this year. The most notable change is the lowering of the permanent migration cap, wherein the threshold will be reduced from 190,000 to 160,000. And I think that's a massive change because it hasn't been, this migration cap hasn't been changed since 2011. And now they're reducing 30,000 to this threshold. And in addition to that, the government also introduced regional visas, and the Department of Home Affairs will start accepting new applications for these visas starting in November. And these visas are going to be temporary visas initially, and some of them will have options to apply for permanent residency in the near future. And those permanent residency visas will be available, if I'm not mistaken, in around 2022. And the government mentions that this will help ease congestion in huge cities like Sydney and Melbourne, because they are offering this visa option to those foreign nationals to live outside of these metropolitan cities. So yeah, that's it for Australia.
That's Australia. Great. So that's going to bring us to our final country in the main presentation this afternoon, and that is Japan. What can you tell us about Japan?
Sure. Japan is a huge country as well, and it has a population of 197 million. And according to an article that I've read, Japan has seen a growth in foreign resident population. And I think their net immigration is on the rise for a sixth straight year. And this number has peaked at about 1.46 million as of October last year. And I think it's about a 14% increase from last year's intake of foreigners. So it's getting the foreign national population in Japan is increasing. I think it's because of the government's way of filling the shortages in labor in the country. So Japan is actually looking to admitting foreign workers with certain skills or knowledge to make up for the serious labor shortage. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So they've recently introduced the designated activities work visa, and the designated activities will have no limit on eligible industries. This work visa would be available to employers and sponsors from any job sectors, as long as there is a full-time employment position on offer. And there has to be a minimum salary requirement of 200,000 yen per month. And in addition to that, the authorities require that the applicants have to pass a Japanese language proficiency test, and they should have also obtained at least a bachelor's degree from a university in Japan. Successful applicants will be granted with an initial validity of 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years. It really depends on the duration of the assignment, and it's at the discretion of the reviewing officer. So this visa can be renewed for a maximum stay of up to 5 years. So I think previously Japan isn't that open to foreign workers, but we've seen them pass a legislation recently wherein they would be looking at hiring foreign talent to fill their labor shortage in the country.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting to hear. You mentioned the labor shortage, and I know Japan is still struggling with an older population.
Yeah.
So it does make sense that they're looking to increase the number of foreign nationals that are able to allow them to work in Japan. Great. So Patricia, and that's gonna bring us to the question and answer session. So as I meant, for our attendees that are currently listening in, if you have a question regarding any of these countries or Asia Pacific trends in general, please type those in. as a reminder, or just as a little house note, we can't answer any specific questions, so please try to keep those a little bit more high level. So Patricia, as we wait for some more questions or for some questions to roll in, what would you say is the main or one to two main takeaways regarding Asia Pacific and the role these countries are playing in terms of global mobility?
Sure, thanks for that, Eric. So several countries in Asia, such as China and Japan, um, initially they were very protectionist. They wouldn't allow foreign nationals to go in the country, but we've seen recent changes in their immigration policies, and they are starting to streamline their immigration processes to better attract top foreign talent and to bridge the labor gap in the country. Although there are a few countries such as Australia and Thailand who we've seen who's becoming stringent in processing visa applications, and they're implementing additional requirements and also introducing new visa types just to protect their current local population, labor population in the country. So these relevant changes really are important in determining where the multinational companies can potentially move their mobile talent to, gain that relevant international experience. So if ever they need any advice on immigration matters such as these one, or where the employees should be sent to within the Asia Pacific region, feel free to contact Envoy on those queries. We are very much happy to help decision makers plan where these employees should be sent out to within the region.
Awesome. That's a great recap. Thanks for providing that. So we are getting a couple questions here. First, though, there are some additional slides I really just want to get to for our attendees. So if you're based in the U.S., later this week we are going to kind of recap Q3 2019, just some U.S. look at some policies that came out in this third quarter. So please join us for that. And then also on October 2nd, just rerunning our very popular ABCs of immigration. So highly encourage everyone to sign up for those. As always, please subscribe to our mailing list so you receive the latest webinar invites as well as the latest content downloads and alerts of when new materials are released. And finally, the screen right here contains the SHRM and HRCI continuing education credits. So I'll leave this screen up for the remainder of our question and answer session. So feel free to copy these down. Again, these will be also included in the follow-up email tomorrow afternoon. So Patricia, got some questions here. I think, so one of the areas, or in this instance, regions that you discussed earlier was Hong Kong, and you touched on the protests. So the first part of this question is, how did the protests in Hong Kong start?
Sure. So these protests began in March, and I think it was ignited by the opposition of the people to the extradition bill. However, these protests are now still ongoing, as the people are now demanding full democracy from China, because as you may all know, Hong Kong is still part of China, and I think they're trying to regain their control over Hong Kong, and yeah, that's the main reason why the citizens of Hong Kong are protesting.
Okay, gotcha. And then I think we may have discussed this earlier as well. But what would you say is the best way to stay informed of ongoing developments in Hong Kong?
Sure. Well, the best way to stay informed is just to read through embassy advisories and read the news, or even get in touch with your immigration providers like us, Envoy. We would be happy to provide any insights that we know of. We have partners locally in the country who would provide beneficial insights on what's really happening on the ground.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you for that. Next question we have here is so kind of connecting Asia to Europe. I'm sure everyone knows the UK is currently in the midst of Brexit. There's still a lot of uncertainty there. So, Patricia, can you provide a really high level overview on maybe how some Asia Pacific countries may be navigating that uncertainty surrounding Brexit? Like maybe something in regards like trade deals or something like that.
That's a great question, Eric. So I've actually read in an article by Harvard Business Review that there's Japanese firms in the UK that are starting to make limited and defensive moves while they wait for what's to come for the Brexit. I think same as with other multinational companies, those companies are starting to relocate their businesses to EU countries, and some of them are even planning to relocate back to Asia or to Japan. And I think in the longer term, there might be new trade deals that will be brokered. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a discussion on a UK-Japan free trade agreement, but then the talks on that broke down in February of this year. So who knows? I'm sure there will be new trade deals because of what's going to happen in the UK. So.
No, that's an interesting point, and I think it's going to be a situation where kind of at the end of the year we'll know more and see how things start playing out as we end 2019 and then head into 2020.
Yeah.
So last question here we have, Patricia. What are some countries in Asia Pacific that we didn't discuss today, but you're also seeing as a destination for global talent?
Sure. There are a few countries that were not covered in our presentation today, such as New Zealand, South Korea, and I think Malaysia as well. So these countries are in the top 6, if I'm not mistaken, in the most talent competitive nations in the region, according to a study conducted by GTCI, which is Global Talent Competitiveness Index. So those 3 countries are also trying to attract foreign talents, and I believe for South Korea, they have also made some changes in the regulations to make it easier for foreign nationals to obtain work visas in the country. So yeah, those are the other 3 countries that we should be looking at, perhaps moving forward.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, as you mentioned, there are just so many countries out there especially in the Asia Pacific region, that a couple months down the line we'll probably have a follow-up to discuss some of these other countries and how they're attracting global talent. So I think that's gonna end things for the presentation today. Thank you for those great questions. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It was a great presentation, and really excited that you're able to provide that insight and provide these insights into the Asia Pacific region. So again, as a final reminder to our attendees, this recording and the slide deck and the continuing education credits will be sent out in a follow-up email tomorrow afternoon. So thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.